Do as I say, not as I do. An old saying that draws attention to our hypocritical nature. Why is it that giving advice to other people comes so effortlessly, while our own lives and decisions are a complete mess? Science has recently claimed to have found the answer. Psychologists began studying a strange phenomenon carefully in the early 2010s, most notably through the work of Igor Grossman and Ethan Kross. In these experiments, participants were asked to reflect on interpersonal conflicts or dilemmas, and some were asked to imagine a friend's situation, while others thought about their own. Researchers then measured elements of what they call wise reasoning, such as intellectual humility, considering multiple perspectives, and awareness that situations change over time. The results kept showing a curious pattern. When people looked at another person's dilemma, they scored higher on these wisdom measures than when facing their own. But does this sound familiar to you? Haven't you heard this before somewhere? This phenomenon is known as the Solomon paradox. It takes its name from King Solomon, the ruler that was celebrated in history for his keen and legendary judgment. It was said that he had luminous wisdom. Stories portray him as a mind able to untangle disputes like knots. Yet the paradox points to a quieter twist in the human condition. People often reason more wisely about other people's problems than their own. When our own life is the stage, insights become fogged glass. Distance seems to sharpen wisdom, and proximity to it, being near it, bends it. This deep insight was sort of explored more in these 2010 experiments, which, in one of them, it involved relationship conflicts. Participants were asked to analyze scenarios like a partner being unfaithful or a disagreement spiraling out of control. Those imagining the issue happening to someone else tended to weigh long-term consequences, acknowledge uncertainty, and search for compromise. Those imagining the same problem in their own lives lean toward rigid predictions, emotional uncertainty, or defensive thinking. It was not that people suddenly became foolish about their own lives. Rather, their reasoning narrowed, like a camera lens zooming too tightly on a single detail. This term, Solomon paradox, emerged from the contrast between the mythic image of wise judgment and the psychological reality of self-involvement. Grossman and Kross and their colleagues argued that wisdom often requires psychological distance. When we observe from afar, the mind behaves like a council chamber, voices debating, possibilities circulating. But when the issues and concerns of our identity, pride, fear, or loss, the council chamber shrinks into a single, loud narrator. This ultimately has implications about human limitation. The mind is not just a reasoning machine, but a self-protecting organism. It filters information through an emotional database. It also reframes the ancient philosophical quest to know thyself. The paradox suggests that self-knowledge is uniquely difficult, not because the self is mysterious in some cosmic sense, but because our emotional circuitry edits the script in real time. We rationalize and reinterpret. We soften edges and magnify threats. But how can one ultimately defeat this kind of thinking, this blockade, this filter that's in the way, this emotional block that occurs when thinking about your own life? I heard an interesting lecture recently from a famous psychologist. I won't name him at this time, but he was talking about how when trying to judge what's best for your own life, to not try to imagine it from yourself, but to try to imagine how you would help a friend or a loved one. How if it were your brother or sister or mother or whoever, close friend, how would you go about delving out that advice to them, there is a component that I think that filter comes off a little bit when you externalize your point of view from the situation. And it's easier said than done. This sounds simple, but there's a very subtle dynamic going on when you truly imagine and try to figure out the problems of your situation. And instead of saying, how will I do this? You project those same problems onto a loved one in a hypothetical scenario, call it a thought experiment. What would you tell them? Suddenly you have all of this incredible insight that involves patience and objectivity and truth in it that wouldn't have been available had you been, soaked in your own ego and trying to do this on your own. I think there's an incredible wisdom and this phenomena, this paradox that exists within us is a source of frustration for so many people. I think this is a universal problem. I think it's because of our fallen nature that we're all prone to hypocrisy. This isn't something that can just be excised totally. There has to be effort and intention in combating that in these exercises of thinking through these issues. I gave someone a really interesting, an interesting piece of advice a few years ago, and I've thought about this. And of course, I'm pretty hypocritical in acting this out, but I used the metaphor of a wall because he was asking me how he can keep from blowing his stack, and losing his temper at work. And I kind of used this metaphor as like a wall of emotionality on the other side of the wall. You put up this wall away from it. Over here, you have just objective reasoning, logic. You're going to think clearly. That keep the emotion out of it. What I told him specifically, what I noticed about him is that he allowed his positive feelings to override his judgment. That can be dangerous too, because you become laxed in your judgment. You do things that you wouldn't do if you were just in a normal mood. And I noticed this about him, but he was concerned about the negative. But I said, if you have this wall, okay, the negative and positive are over there. This is all this swirling chaos of emotion. And I said, you want to keep out the negative, the anger, the aggression. But if you're bashing a hole through that wall to get to the positive is in there too. If you're trying to draw out and you're being fed positive, overly fed this positive emotion, you've got this gaping hole in the wall. And when you pull the positive through there, the negative is going to come with it. You're not going to be able to control that. They're all mixed together. It's like this swirling kind of a weird metaphor, but hopefully this makes sense. But you only allow small parts in and control it. And you don't allow emotion to rule, period, even in the positive. You have to control that. And if you control the positive, you also control the negative. And to be honest, I don't know if he actually understood the depth of what I was trying to say, but let me know what you think. Tell me about a time that you saw your own hypocrisy. It was just sort of in your face, and it is like a smack to the face when it happens, but tell me about a time when you were able to overcome it, or if there were times where you couldn't overcome it, if you're struggling with it now. Please like, subscribe, comment, you know the drill. Anything you do to interact with this channel is just massively appreciated. I've got tons more stuff on the way, but if you need something to tide you over, check this stuff out here, and I will see you all in the next video.